and welcome to Ramp Up to Your Retirement, podcast hosted by Dan Reese. Dan, good to be with you. I've got my own title for today's topic, and I think if you don't mind, I'm just going to go ahead and throw it out there on the table. Today is about the danger of not knowing what you don't know.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. I like that. I think that's very accurate. So as we dig in today, I think hopefully we uncover some of those things.
Well, I think it's really, really important. Now, I'm speaking as a guy who spent 3 decades covering business and financial news. I spent 3 decades seeing people who didn't know things they thought they knew, and I saw all kinds of mistakes. But it seems to me, Dan, that now, today, more than ever, it's an easier trap to fall into because, hey, well, we've got AI. I can talk to my chat GPT. I can ask Grok, what should I do? And that doesn't quite get it done, does it?
I mean, it's very easy to be overconfident today. It really is. Yeah. And, it's funny. I was just, I've got kids, 2 in college, 1 in high school. And we were talking about writing papers the other day in our house. And I was laughing because I said, we used to have to do real research, like card catalogs and periodicals and all these things to try to find information on whatever we were writing about. Yeah. And it was a lot, right? It took a lot of time. And but at the same time, it was very rewarding, as you uncovered things and so forth. But what do they do today? They get on ChatGPT or one of these things, and they can get all kinds of information very quickly. Now, what's the bad side of that? Is it always right? Well, people are finding it's not always right. There can be mistakes with these chat bots and in all these things. And but that's just a simple example. And when today we talk a little bit about, financial planning and investments and taxes and all these things, it's easy to get on ChatGPT and say, hey, create my retirement plan, right? What do you get back is the question. And how does that apply to you specifically, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, if you ask me that question, I could give you an answer. It doesn't mean that it would be worth anything because I'm not a financial advisor, but and that's kind of the way I look at all of the AI tools. They're wonderful. They're great. They're fantastic. And as a guy who remembers having to go to the library, Dan, and get books and pull them off shelves and make notes and make catalog and note things down by hand, I love today. I love the technology.
Yeah.
But they all come with a reminder, hey, you might want to double check what we're telling you here on AI because it's not necessarily right.
Well, yeah. And I mean, even to go along with that is all these social influencers, financial influencers, however you want to call them, they really fall into giving more this sense of, this false sense of security because they make it sound super easy. They talk in generalities and they say, well, you need to do this or you need to do that. The problem is that when you get a very complex topic like retirement and investment and tax planning, everything you do has a result that you may not be aware of, right? And so you listen to an influencer and you're like, oh, I don't need to work with anybody. I can do this stuff and I'm just going to use theirs and then I'll tweak it with my AI and things. And I just think it's really, the point of today is to let people know, hey, it's not that easy. And I'm not saying that because, basically we're thinking we want everybody to work with us because we don't have the time for everyone to work with us. What I want is an awareness that, you do need to find a qualified certified financial planner to walk you through a lot of these things. Because as we talk about them today, these 3 core areas of investments, retirement planning, and taxes, we're just going to touch on some high level things. And I think you'll hear it gets very complicated very quickly.
So let's dive into it. And let's start with the hidden risk that a lot of people don't probably consider or don't even really know about.
Yeah. I mean, some of the initial hidden risks when you start talking about is we're people. And I think this is the number one risk. We are human beings and we have fears and we have dreams and we have emotions every day of the week, right? And we have people depending on us, right? So let's say, it doesn't matter if it's a husband or wife that it's going to take the lead in this do-it-yourself financial planning. The decisions you make apply not just to yourself, they apply to others, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so whether they turn out good or bad, it can be monumental for your future. And I think this hidden risk is that you become overconfident and you don't understand how emotions play into financial planning. And then when times get crazy, a simple example, what happened early 2025? April hits, all the tariff liberation day, right? And what happened to markets? They went south in a hurry, pretty substantially. Now we know because we fast forward further into 2025, they all rebounded and markets have, up to this point of the year done quite nicely. But what do you do when all of a sudden it's on you? And that's a huge hidden risk when you talk about just understanding your emotions, understanding that you do have them. And there's more than likely a time when the going gets tough that you're going to make a poor decision that you can't take back. And it's going to affect your plan the rest of your life, right? And so, there's other hidden things too, but I think the big thing that I always talk about is really not understanding. This isn't all logic. It's not.
Oh. No. But before we leave the idea of the hidden risk of doing your own investment planning, you must see a couple of these. I know I've seen it over my years of working in the business and the industry. I see that people don't understand the importance of diversification, don't understand, or they don't understand that they may be more concentrated in certain areas than they realize, and they don't understand the idea of risk versus return. What's your experience been?
Yeah, I mean, when you get into actual investment planning, right? So we're going to focus on that for a minute. We're talking about these risks. Number one, it's very difficult to not get sucked into the media on this stuff, like the Magnificent Seven, right? And all these things. And that's all you need. If you just own these stocks, everything's going to be great. That's just not how the world works. Markets change. Like there's cycles in markets with different, types of stocks that are going to do well during this period versus another. And you have to understand that the goal isn't to get the highest return every year. Because the problem with trying to get the highest return every year is you're going to experience some really big lows. And when you get into retirement, that can be a real problem, especially when you need to take money out of those investments, right? So really understanding, what is the goal of my portfolio for me to be able to realize all the important things I want to do in retirement, take care of my family, maybe give to charity, do some of these things that I really value. How do I position my portfolio in order to do those things and put me in the highest, give myself the highest probability that I'm going to be able to do those things? And when you get sucked into this whole chasing returns and listening to the media and listening to some of these shows, Kramer of, these are the next hot stocks. And you're like, man, if I just get those, the next thing I know, I'll have 300,000 more or 400,000 more if that really hits. And it's like playing the lottery. And, what it does is it takes you down a really bad path, because then what happens when that doesn't work out, which most of the time it doesn't, chasing returns, then what do? It's like a bad gambler. Well, I just got to make one more bet. And the next thing you know, you went from a situation where you were in really good shape for a good, nice retirement to, oh boy, I got a real problem now. And then what do I need to do to try to get back on track? So, I mean, those are some of the things, outside of that behavioral bias where regardless, they do studies all the time, Bill, and it never really changes. It's kind of incredible because all this information's out there. Do-it-yourself investors regularly trail the markets, meaning they regularly get a worse return than what the fund that they're in and different things like that, the markets as a whole receive. And that is because we are behavioral creatures, right? We tend to pull out when we should stay in. We jump in when we should maybe not jump in because it's already happened. But all those things around investments make it very difficult to manage them on your own. One quick note on that, I was in a class years ago, and there's a very well-respected financial person. I'm not going to name them, but they were giving the class. And he brought out a point. He said human beings are not capable of managing their own money. And he meant that from an investment perspective. I'm not talking about paying bills and the regular day-to-day stuff.
Right. Right. Yeah.
And his point is that we cannot, 99% of us are not able to stay in the game the right way and invest the right way to have long-term success.
Yeah. Yeah. That it's an interesting observation. And what's more interesting to me, Dan, is that of the things you're going to talk about today, the investment part of it is the simplest piece of this puzzle.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing is, you're right about that. Like, it's pretty easy with all the technology today to create a pretty decent portfolio, right?
Right.
And so if you can do that and then stay with it, you're generally going to do okay from an investment perspective. But what, research shows, people are unable to do it. It's just too, I always say investing can be seductive and then super scary. Because it's like your friend tells you about, I bought NVIDIA, way before it went up, and I'm a multimillionaire now. And you're like, man, why didn't I do that? Right?
Yeah.
And it sucks you into this idea that skill was why they got to the point they got to, and it was luck. I mean, if everyone knew NVIDIA was going to go up like it did, everyone would have bought it, right? A whole bunch of it.
Oh, please.
Exactly. So, but that's just not how things work.
No, it's not. But, again, for the DIYers out there, it's like, okay, fine. If you want to do your own investment planning, that's one thing. For me, the much more complicated part of this, Dan, is what comes after, and part of what this podcast is about, is like retirement planning makes investment planning look like a walk in the park.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing is with retirement planning, now you start taking all these resources that you've worked your whole life to accumulate, right? Retirement accounts that you've built, Social Security benefits, possibly pension benefits. Maybe you've got a rental property. There's all these different resources that you've kind of built up over your lifetime, which I would just call your nest egg, right? When you put it all together, that is your nest egg.
Yeah.
And now you have to figure out, how do I maximize or optimize all those resources to try to build out a retirement plan that gives me the highest probability of achieving all the things that are important to me in retirement. And it's super complex. I mean, to the point that even someone like me that deals with this every single day, I continue to learn. I continue to take classes. We continue to look at research of how can we consistently improve, because things change in the world. Investment tools change. There's all kinds of tools that you can put your money into that offer different things. And there's new ones being created all the time. And so when you sit there and start looking at it and saying, I know, I'm just going to use my cash first, and then I'm going to turn on Social Security as soon as I can. And then I'm going to, when that runs down, I'm going to start using this account, my retirement account, because I know eventually I've got required distributions. I got this all figured out. Oftentimes what they're missing is that may be a solution, but it's likely not your best solution. And if you work so hard to accumulate that nest egg, don't you want to have the best solution to be able to really end up with the most certainty plus the most wealth, that you can muster out of what you've saved? I mean, because most people do want to give as much, to charity and to their kids as they can at the end of life too, or during. So yeah, you're right. It's not for the faint of heart, because there's so many moving parts that you just can easily miss as you're working through that.
What are some of the most common parts that people miss in your experience, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big things is that they miss longevity. They don't really understand that, it's funny. We've talked about this before. No one thinks they're going to live very long. Like, oh man, I'm probably going to make it to 70 or 75, and well, the numbers continue to show that, typically if a husband and wife reach 65, many times the man will live till 85 and the woman till 90. And those are averages, right? That doesn't, everybody's different. We don't have certainty about that, but we know people live a long time. And so you have to plan for that. You have to put yourself in a situation where we know things are going to cost more 10, 15, 20 years down the road than they cost today. Inflation is an ever living thing that continues to occur. And so having that longevity risk and understanding is super important. The other one that we see all the time, because it is very complicated, and this is where we spend a lot of time, is withdrawal strategies. Once we figure out how do we set up our investment portfolio, how do we use those things? When do we turn on Social Security? When do we start taking money out of our IRA? Do we do Roth conversions? Do we basically create extra income early in retirement to have less income and therefore maybe less taxes later, which we'll get into taxes later on? But really, this withdrawal strategy is such a huge piece when you start thinking about it. And then the other thing that people, they know it, but it's kind of hard to really get their arms around it, is really understanding healthcare and long-term care costs. And a lot of people just kind of have the opinion, well, I don't know really there's much you can do about it, so I'm not going to even think about it, which is really not a good approach. Really understanding what's your risk, what are things that maybe you can do to help plan for that to some degree, because some plan's better than no plan, around the healthcare and the long-term care issue. And so, when you start looking at that, that's ultra important. And just a final thing about withdrawal rates, there's all kinds of data out there about withdrawal rates. How much can I take out and all these other things? One thing that I see people make the mistake of, and I've heard this multiple times when we've had new clients come in, they're like, well, my portfolio's averaged 8%. That means I can take out 8 each year, right? And the reality is, no, you can't, because percentages aren't fair. If you're averaging 8%, you're taking some risk in that portfolio, so you could very easily have a 20% down year. And as soon as that happens, then if you're taking your 8, you go into this downward spiral. And next thing you know, you're running out of money, right? So that's another huge, huge risk out there.
Well, I want to talk about healthcare costs for 1 second, because what I have found, just talking with friends, talking with people I know, is a lot of people don't understand. They think, well, my healthcare is taken care of because I'm going to go on Medicare.
Right.
And they don't realize Medicare is going to cost them, depending on what plan you choose. But there's a multitude of plans, and there are cheaper plans and more expensive plans, but it's not, as it exists in their mind, free. They're going to have to pay for that. And that comes out of their Social Security, so that it's like they fail to calculate or realize, wait a minute, my healthcare is going to cost me money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, we typically see, so if you think about Part B is around 185 right now. And by the way, if you don't understand retirement planning and your income gets too high because you're not sure how all this works, that premium can go up substantially from the 185 a month per person, right? It's so typically if you have 2 people in the household, then you have a Medicare supplement policy that, could run 150, 160, depending on where you are. There's a lot of factors. Like you said, there's a lot of choices. You've got a drug plan, prescription, Part D plan. You can easily get in, $400 a month, all in when you start figuring these things. So if there's 2 of you, that's $800 a month. And that's roughly $10,000 a year between a couple, in retirement, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can also have some additional out of pocket. And if you go with the Medicare Advantage, it gets even more complicated. So we're talking about things that continually get more complicated, right? Not simpler. And just asking ChatGPT, hey, should I do traditional Medicare or an Advantage plan, is probably not going to get you where you want to be, because there's a ton of factors around that: where you live, what kind of medical conditions you might have, how much freedom do you need to go to Cleveland Clinic or Mayo Clinic or Anderson, for cancer, if you've got those types of issues. That all matters, right? When you start looking at where you pick. And so I think that what you said is very accurate. People don't fully understand the cost. They also don't fully understand what the different plans mean to them if they get sick.
Right.
And there's a lot of study cases or, case studies around that, where you'd be shocked the differences of healthcare provided or options provided with different conditions that people have experienced.
Yeah. No, it's amazing. And that's the beauty of a certified financial planner, is that you and others like you know And they can tell you, say, hi, maybe you ought to sit down here because it's not free. Let's talk about
Yeah, and they're all good
that.
conversations. And Bill, that's something just to kind of piggytail onto what you're saying is that a lot of this is having somebody that you have confidence in that you can have these conversations with.
Right.
Hey, Bill, what do you think? I've talked to friends and they were talking about this or that. And having someone that's educated in that area to say, well, have you considered this or have you considered that? Because your friend may or may not be right for their own situation. But I can guarantee you, I don't think I have any two clients that are the same. Everybody's different. Everybody has different things going on in their lives. And so it's really, it's an interesting thing, but you got to be aware that because it works well for someone doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work well for you.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned tax planning earlier. How does that work? I mean, and can that make a substantial difference?
It really can. And what's changed tax planning so much through the years is this transition that we've gone on from mainly pensions to now more retirement accounts. So the pensions were pretty straightforward. You retired, I got my pension, Social Security, some money in the bank. You could still do some tax planning depending on your situation, but for the most part, it was pretty straightforward. Things weren't going to change a whole lot year to year. Now, with this, advent starting in the 80s, with people really starting to fund these 401ks and now having substantial balances in these pre-tax accounts, you need to understand what that's going to look like throughout your retirement. And, a lot of people forget the power of compounding when it comes to taxes. So if you've got a pre-tax account that you haven't paid taxes on, compounding is awesome when you see your account value grow. But understanding your tax bill is also growing as that balance grows. And the other thing that's growing is your future required distributions, because that's a percentage of that balance, right? Yep. So then all of a sudden you start looking and you're like, I didn't realize that if my required distribution gets too high, going back to healthcare, now my Medicare premium goes up a bunch. Kind of a hidden tax that a lot of people aren't aware of. And really understanding even like, what do I have in each account from a tax perspective? So if I have a bunch of dividend paying stocks in my brokerage account, is that a good thing? Well, maybe not if they're going through to your tax return and creating all this extra tax, where, possibly if those might be better off in an IRA where you don't have, not creating taxes every year on money you're not using. And there's just endless areas around the different account types, the holdings that you have in them, how you use them, how you distribute money out of them. A simple example, you might have a year where you've got unrealized gains in a brokerage account and you've got, an IRA and you're trying to decide, hey, would it be better to fill up my 12% bracket to take out, some money out of that IRA, or should I realize some gains? What would be a better play there long term for me based on my own situation? That's complicated. That is not a simple thing. And, I always tell people, we had a really interesting case a year ago. I remember clients, their tax rate was pretty low and they were trying to decide, they needed some money for a car and they were like, okay, which account should we take it out of? So what we always do, we model it. We're like, if you take it from this account, this is what it's going to look like. If you take it from that account, that's what it's going to look like. Well, for them, because their income was low enough, they weren't paying taxes on their Social Security. But guess what? If they took that distribution out of their IRA, it pushed up their income high enough, they would then have a bunch of more tax on the Social Security that they never even thought about. And so by us running it multiple ways, they could see, I'm going to actually take most of that out of my brokerage. And they still took some out of the regular IRA. It was a balance. So they could get some money out of there and still keep their Social Security at a very low tax rate. And so there's all kinds of stuff like this that pops up as you're doing, tax planning and retirement. And like I said, it's all tied together. It's tied to your investments. It's tied to your retirement plan. And so when you get that many variables, and I'm an econ major back in the day, in college, and our teachers used to always talk about that. All the variables, the reason economics is such a difficult area is because you're dealing with people and there are so many variables that it creates all these crazy outcomes that no one expected, right? And to try to just figure that out is very difficult. That's why you have all these prognosticators every year that are what? Wrong. I mean, the majority are wrong because it's so complex. And so what we don't want is we don't want you going into retirement working your butt off your whole life to build this nest egg. And then all of a sudden, because you don't understand how all these things play together, you put yourself in a really bad situation that you may not be able to get out of, or, it may create really bad long-term effects for you.
Yeah. And this is where I want to underscore a point here, because it's important that people turn to financial planning professionals on this, because it is complicated and there are a lot of variables. And there is a big difference between a simple financial advisor and a financial advisor who is a certified financial planner like yourself. And I'm not telling listeners they all got to go to work with Dan, but I would love your thoughts on the importance of understanding the distinction between financial advisors and certified financial planners.
Yeah, I think that's really good to speak to, because you think about what you mentioned earlier about the investment piece is probably the easiest piece, although the most difficult from an emotional standpoint because of the fact that
that's true. Yeah.
we have that massive fear and greed, right? But when you become a certified financial planner, you take coursework in, around taxes and estate planning, in retirement planning, all these different areas, and you have to prove that you're proficient in those areas through testing. And then you have ongoing continuing education to continue to learn and grow in those areas so that you can do a good job. And so it's no disrespect to someone that just does, like, quote, investments or investment planning, but that's just one piece of the pie. And so, what we feel like, and if you look at studies, generally speaking, people that work with certified financial planners do better. I mean, that's just, their wealth grows faster. They have better risk management. They tend to be happier with their planning because they are being, all these things are being talked about and touched on. And if you want to get to the nitty gritty, like Vanguard's done studies, several places have done studies. There are actual numbers around, which I'm not going to disclose because, compliance, I don't have the exact numbers, but you can see tangible, better results through all the studies that have been done. And a lot of it's because when you put all this stuff together, you make small incremental gains in a lot of these areas, maybe slightly better in investments, maybe slightly better in taxes, all these different areas. And all of a sudden it creates, because money compounds, a much better long-term result than what you'd get otherwise. But the final thing is, and people hear the term fiduciary, certified financial planners take a fiduciary oath and they work under that. And I believe that most certified financial planners are really working hard to really deserve that trust, around it, and really do a good job to consistently give advice that they feel like is going to put you in a good spot, right? Not chasing returns, not trying to be a hot shot, not trying to be the cool guy that, gave you this super hot tech or stock tip, but really looking at long-term strategies that are proven and that are going to really help you do well. Because this isn't about hitting home runs. We always talk about that. This is about making sure you stay in the game. You're consistently making progress, right? Because that if you can do that, you're going to be pretty happy.
Yeah. And to that end, Dan, if people are listening to this podcast and they perhaps aren't already a client of yours and they find the comments that you're making are interesting, what's the best way for them to reach out to you to at least have an initial conversation to see if maybe they want to work with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the easiest thing is we can schedule a phone call. And I love, in case you can't tell, I love talking about this stuff. Brent in the office loves talking about this stuff. And I think the reason we like it so much is because it's nice to get people like unbiased information. You know what I mean? Like giving them, hey, I'm running into this. What do you think? And we can give them things to think about. And so just pick up the phone. Our phone number is 517-783-1695. Go to our website, averywealth.com. It's in the show notes. You can click on that. There is a lot of great information on our website. You can click on the contact us. We'll reach out and shoot you an email and find a time that's going to work for you to talk. But you're always welcome to come in the office too. But I know it can be a little bit of a hurdle to talk to somebody you don't know. And we don't want you to feel at all like obligated to anything. We're here to help you really learn and make better decisions. And so, but like I say, the website's great. There's so many great little pieces on there, like educational stuff too.
Yeah. And for people who don't have a financial advisor, we should make this point really clear. You can have a conversation with Dan. It doesn't mean you're committed to Dan. It means that you have a conversation and you and Dan can decide whether you're going to go forward with that. And you maybe can call another financial advisor, but it's important that you reach out. And I guess that's my sort of underscore on your point, Dan.
Yeah. And good point about like talking to a few different people, because one of the reasons that I think this do-it-yourself trend is happening outside of all these other tools out there, I think that, there's, generally speaking, if you look at surveys, there's a distrust and people worry about getting taken advantage of and, taken advantage of and something bad happening. And so I do think it's really good to talk to some different people so you can compare and contrast, different personalities and making sure that the person that you decide you want to talk further with or work with fits you. You know what I mean? From a personality standpoint. That there's a mesh, because it is a very, it's a deep relationship. You tend to begin to rely on your financial planner for a lot of things around money, and you want to make sure you're always comfortable picking up the phone and calling them or emailing them and saying, "Hey, I got a question about this," and you feel like that's going to get you, a good result. So,
yep. And for those of you who are listening who think, "Oh, gee, I missed his contact information," don't worry, it's in the show notes. You can go look there and you can get the website, you can get the phone numbers, and you can reach out to Dan if you so choose. The other thing I would encourage you to do that takes no time at all is just hit the follow button here and become a subscriber to the podcast, because when you do, you will never miss another podcast because you're notified. Hey, Dan's got a new podcast. You want to give it a listen. The other thing I would ask, this is just personal on my part, is if you like the podcast, tell people about it. Word of mouth promotion is great. It's way better than some bot telling you what to listen to. So we would appreciate it if you would pass on the knowledge. Okay. Thank you very much. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker. On behalf of Dan and everybody at Avery, thank you for taking the time to listen today, and we'll catch you next time around. Thank you for listening to Ramp Up Your Retirement. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at www.averywealth.com or give us a call at 517-783-1695. And don't forget to click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Avery Wealth. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. The opinions voiced in Ramp Up to Retirement with Dan Reese are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. To determine what may be appropriate for you, consult with your attorney, accountant, financial or tax advisor prior to investing. Guests on the show may not be affiliated with CWM LLC. Views and comments by guests may not be representative of CWM LLC. Investment advisory services are offered through CWM LLC, an SEC-registered investment advisor. Carson Partners, a division of CWM LLC, is a nationwide partnership of advisors.